GracieMag.com Choke MMA podcast. And now your hosts, Eric Fontanez and E. Spencer Kite.
Welcome, ladies and gents, to episode number 2 of the Choke MMA podcast presented by GracieMag.com. I am your host, Eric Fontanez, and with me as always is ESK himself, E. Spencer Kite. What up?
Not a lot, man. I'm excited that we're back. I'm excited that we didn't become one of those shows that was like, after the first episode, we needed to take a 3-week hiatus to revamp everything.
Yeah, I was actually kind of worried because for those who don't know, I was waiting pretty much all day for Spencer to show up on the internet because he lives in Canada. I live in Southern California. I'm not going to call him and rake up my phone bill. So I was waiting for him to show up on Skype or Twitter or something, even tweeted him and mentioned him in the post saying, hey, where you at? And finally he said, hey, I just got done walking my dog. I'm ready to go. So we were this close to postponing it a week because ESK didn't show up, and I didn't have a replacement for him. So thank you, ESK, for showing up this week.
In my defense, I was at a early lunch meeting so that I could do this show as we're doing it now. I could have held off and been like, I'm going to do a 1 o'clock lunch meeting. But no, this show takes priority. So we did lunch nice and early, which was kind of weird because I wasn't that hungry. So I now have lots of nice leftovers. But yeah, here we are. I'm glad I could finally arrive on the interwebs for you so we can do this.
Well, thank you for prioritizing this
Yes.
over your meeting with your parole officer. How's that trial going, by the way?
It's well, when you're able to use the temporary insanity defense, things are easy.
Hey, temporary insanity works for a 45-minute podcast. Today's episode, we will go over what was the weirdness that is UFC 159, Chael Sonnen versus Jon Jones. Jon Jones, obviously, just like everybody predicted, smashed his opponent. We will also talk about Cheick Kongo and how he dominated an entire day of news for the first time in his career, and it all had to do about him not being in the UFC anymore, which is just weird and odd. Also, we will go over Eddie Alvarez and him going nuts on Twitter randomly about fighting in places like Boca Raton, Florida in some underground MMA fights. Thank you, Spencer, for bringing this to my attention. We will go over that. We'll also go over Gegard Mousasi and his potential drop to 185, something I think he should have done a while ago, something that I've talked to him about doing, but he's finally taken it seriously, according to his manager, Nima Safapour, who got in contact with me earlier this week. But in any case, let's get to it. Weekend news. Chael Sonnen was not victorious on Saturday at UFC 159.
Not even a little bit.
Not even a little bit. But what's strange, and the word strange will come up a lot in today's review of UFC 159, Sonnen was this close to becoming the UFC light heavyweight champion because of a dislocated toe.
Yes.
There were reports that it was a compound fracture, then it was dislocated, then it went back to compound fracture, now it's dislocated again as of today. ESK, you watched UFC 159. What did you think of the main event?
I thought the main event was even more of a smashing than I expected. When Jon Jones came out, hit that takedown right away, the words out of my mouth were, well, this is done. And I didn't expect it to get out of the first round after that point, because as Jon said in the post-fight, he wanted to out Chael Sonnen. He did so effectively.
Absolutely.
He has phenomenal ground and pound. And so when he's better than you at the one thing you're really good at right away, that doesn't bode well. It didn't play out well. And still Chael Sonnen almost backdoored his way into a championship.
Almost.
Which, to his credit, he said at the post-fight press conference, he would have had to accept the belt because he would be the champion by default, but we all know who the champion was. We all know what really happened there, kind of thing.
Yes, he got taken down fairly quickly, and it wasn't necessarily like a textbook single leg takedown or a double leg even. It was Jones holding his left leg and then throwing his giant arm over Chael Sonnen and pretty much just lifting him up like a feather and slamming him onto his back, at which point ground and pound ensued, and Sonnen was just getting smashed. But in the middle of that first round, John Jones suffered a toe injury, which was pretty gruesome, I must say. I saw that and was like, oh, God. And I've seen a lot of bloody things in my time for some odd reason. I don't come from the ghetto, I swear. But I have, and I saw that picture of the toe, and I was totally thrown back by it. I almost upchucked something. But ESK, you said you saw it and you were okay.
I mean, I was okay. You see the replay, and it's pretty nasty. Like, I'll admit, it's not fun to watch. His toe sort of moving in a direction and in a fashion that toes aren't supposed to move. Yeah. But I mean, it's not the worst that we've seen in the UFC. I think Corey Hill's broken leg takes the cake there. I've seen some really gnarly looking, baseball injuries of guys landing weird and shattering their ankle. Jason Kendall, when he played for the Pittsburgh Pirates, still sticks in my head. It was gross, but it wasn't like I got to run to the bathroom and vomit kind of gross.
I almost made it up to the bathroom, but I didn't quite make it in time. I was pretty grossed out by it. And mind you, I cover MMA for a living. So I see the blood and the tears and sweat and all those typical things. But when I saw that toe, I was like, damn, I don't ever want to do anything relatively close to that. And I'll be glad to stay away from it. Now, Chael Sonnen wants a Brazilian by the name of Wanderlei Silva. He called him out on UFC tonight, saying things to the extent of, Wanderlei Silva called me out before, but the fight never made sense. Now it does, according to Sonnen in a quote. Does this fight make sense, Spencer? Wanderlei Silva versus Chael Sonnen?
I think it absolutely doesn't. And this is sort of where you have to give, in my opinion, credit to the brilliance and genius that is Chael Sonnen in terms of fight promotion. Because if you remember at the press conference, if you had a chance to watch the post-fight press conference, there was sort of all the talk about, is this the end? And people were asking Chael, and he said, I don't really know. If there's not a clear line to the championship, then I don't want to be one of these guys that's hanging around. And like dismissively says, what do you want me to do? Hang around and fight guys like Wanderlei Silva? Yeah. And then 2 days later,
I want Wanderlei Silva.
2 days later hits, you know what? I'm not leaving. I'm staying at 205 and give me Wanderlei Silva, which is like planted the seed and you didn't even think about it on Saturday night, and then comes back on Tuesday and is like, you know what? Now I want that fight. And it's a perfect fight in my opinion. Both big names, easy to market, can be a main event on a television broadcast or the co-main event of a show where you don't necessarily have to have that big, really meaningful championship fight, right? Because their name value sort of carries so much. And they're in a similar position. Yes, Wanderlei's coming off a win, Chael's coming off a loss, but career-wise and sort of overall placement-wise, they're in a similar place. They're going to go back and forth in terms of trash talking from here on out. I mean, you could go back and use some of Chael's old stuff about Brazilians, and not even have to record any new material from him. I would like to see him actually shut down the material a little bit. But
which initially sparked some talk back from Wanderlei, because if you remember a couple of years ago, the two of them were in a car and somebody happened to have a video camera, and Wanderlei promptly told Chael, who was sitting in the back seat, "You talk about Brazilians, you get your teeth knocked out."
Yes.
And Chael wasn't being Chael in that car ride. He didn't say anything back. He didn't come back with anything witty. He just kind of nodded his head and said, "Yep, okay, all right."
Yeah.
Which made me think.
There are times and there are people where you don't say anything.
And Chael is smart enough to know when that time is. Clearly, in that car in Brazil, I think it was. Was it in Brazil? I don't even know where they were.
Yeah, I don't remember where they were, but there are just certain places where you say things and respond and continue conversations, and other times where where not saying a lot is your best course of action.
And that was his best course of action that day. However, Tuesday was not. Cheick continued by saying that he's going to take on Vanderlei, or he wants to take on Vanderlei, and he hopes the UFC makes it happen. Even went to the extent of saying that, talking about that video that we were just talking about, and someone putting it up on YouTube with subtitles because he knew I couldn't understand it and called me out. Quote Chael Sonnen.
Yes.
So I'm thinking this fight is going to be interesting, and rumor is that it's going to be on the Fox Sports 1, the inaugural, the launch of Fox Sports 1 in August. And you just talked about it being good for a TV spot. So do you think this is main event material for the launch of Fox Sports 1?
I think it is. I mean, I think it's a fight that would fit that platform and fit as a good main event for the launch of that new platform, the newly sort of incarnated Fox Sports 1, because you don't necessarily have to have like Chael Sonnen and Vanderlei Silva, even though they're not champions, haven't been champions, at least in the UFC, are far more recognizable than a number of the current UFC champions. And so it makes a lot more sense to me to use two guys that the general public probably knows. Definitely Chael Sonnen. Vanderlei is a guy that any MMA fan, be it, a little bit beyond casual all the way through hardcore, knows really well, has that loyal following that you can set them up as the main event. Chael's going to give you the promotional effort. Vanderlei will as well. And they're big enough names that you don't have to sort of force feed a champion that people don't necessarily know. People will tune in for this fight. And that's what you need with the first event on this new network, to sort of show people where it is, show people what you're doing, expose everybody to Fox Sports 1 and draw the audience there so that they know right off the bat that this is where your UFC content will be going forward, save for the 4 fights a year on big Fox or pay-per-view events, which we all sort of have a good understanding of when they are and where they are.
Early expert pick, Vanderlei Silva or Chael Sonnen. What's yours, ESK?
I'm going to say Chael just because I think he's
picking again against the Brazilian. What does it matter with you?
Banished from this show.
Don't worry. I'll defend you, friend. Not really. Yeah. I'm going to go run and hide.
Yeah, I'm simply going to say that I think he's a cerebral and tactical enough fighter that he's not going to go out there and try to get in a fist fight with Vanderlei Silva. I think he's still a very, very good wrestler when he's able to implement his game plan. And I think he's still I think he's got a little bit more left in the tank than Vanderlei, who sort of needs guys to fight to his style and his tempo to be successessful.
Well, there you go. Chael Sonnen.
My last words on this podcast, probably.
You're fired, sir. You are fired for not picking a Brazilian.
That's right.
Cheick Kongo dominated a day of news for the first time ever. Nobody ever interviews this guy, but on the day that he makes the most news in his UFC career, it's the day that he's not with the company anymore. Cheick Kongo was reported to be cut by the UFC. His manager from MMA Elite also tweeted that he's been released by the UFC. Later, it surfaces that he wasn't in fact cut or released, that he fulfilled his contract and, that he will not be re-signed. So I think I was either Tuesday or Wednesday of this week that Cheick Kongo was the only thing you saw on MMA news outlets. And it was remarkable to me. I think the bigger story was just the fact that he was the main bit of news all day. More so than he was released or cut. He was just in the news all day, dominated it. What'd you think?
There's not a lot of days where Cheick Kongo is the number one story. And as you said, unfortunately, it's because he will no longer be competing in the UFC, which is sort of a bad way to be.
Yes.
Bad way to be the headline for the day for the first time. And the funnier part to me is just that it was sort of like it became that sort of he said, she said of people people reacting to his picture no longer being on UFC.com, which is a very funny way to sort of judge who's still on the roster to me and who's still active fighters, because I'm looking at the light heavyweight roster now, and by that metric, Randy Couture, Chuck Liddell, and Tito Ortiz could fight at some point. And then just that it became Cheick Kongo got cut, and the UFC was like, well, actually, we offered him a new 4-fight deal. He turned it down, then got knocked out, and we're just not going to bother bringing him back at this point.
Yeah.
So,
and
sort of a poor choices moment.
Yeah. I mean, but then again, he is in his late 30s at this point. I mean, does he really have any motivation to come back and get another, however many fights, 4 or 5 fight deal to come back and deal with what he's been dealing with lately? I mean, he's been the victim of several knockouts, like highlight reel knockouts. I mean, even Frank Mir at one point threw an overhand left and floored him, shooting him 10 feet back. Does he really want to come back and deal with that anymore?
Yeah, and that's the other part of it, is that even if he had inked that 4-fight deal prior to the fight last Saturday, he still could have gotten cut after that first round loss to Roy Nelson. It probably would have been at reduced money because, as you said, he is sort of older in terms of a fighting career. He's been around for a really long time. He's had those opportunities. So for both sides of it, the UFC probably thinking, we've given him the opportunity to break into the upper echelon. It hasn't ever happened. He's getting a little older. We'll keep him around, but only if it's at the right number. And for Cheick, it's one of those things. He has multiple interests outside of fighting. I know he opened up a boutique clothing outlet recently. So like you said, do you want to keep coming back to these situations where it probably isn't? I mean, I don't fight professionally for a living. I would assume that at a certain point it gets tiring training and working hard for 3 months to get blasted with that overhand right and be done inside of 3 minutes. And so you can use that 3 months to do a lot of other stuff.
Yeah. I mean, especially with the new boutique.
But, you save the brain cells.
Yeah, and I live close enough to that boutique to where I could literally go shopping there if I wanted to. Not saying I could afford the stuff that goes on in there. After all, I'm on a reporter's salary, so I'm not sure I could get everything off of Cheick's Boutique or whatever it's called. I'm not really sure what, but I really must stop by there at one point. Another thing I think is interesting about this entire situation is that Kongo's manager quit immediately following this. Did you see that?
I sort of saw something. I didn't know who his manager was, and I'm assuming you mean Aiden Halpern of MMA Elite, the clothing brand.
Yes, he's quoted as saying, "I'm tired of the rumors and nonsense. People I thought were friends in the industry turn out not to care. I become personally involved with everything I do, but it all comes down to money with these guys. I feel underappreciated. I know I'm not perfect, but I try. I try to go overboard to help out." He also goes on to compare his relationships in MMA being, in contrast, bad to like the one he had with Sean Merriman. He said he worked with Merriman on a clothing line called Lights Out, and even though he decided to pull out of that, the two remain friends. But with MMA, I guess it's just a different feel. So my question to you, ESK, do you feel this is kind of a really telling about what the MMA industry is really like with relationships, or do you think this is kind of overreacting? Why are you stepping down when something like this happens?
I mean, I don't know enough of the situation and enough of sort of what is prompting Mr. Halpern to say, that's it, I'm done, this isn't what I expected. But I think in business, man, we always sort of everybody gets to that point, and we've all fallen subject to it in the past, where we sort of get super comfortable and almost forget that there are business decisions that are going to get made as well. And so like I said, I don't know what exactly, if it's, Cheick being released that is prompt, or Cheick not continuing his career or not signing the new contract, or whatever the case may be, that has prompted this. That's it. I'm out. The relationships aren't the way I expected them to be. But I mean, you see so often where guys sort of feel like they're getting blindsided when it's really just you forgot for a minute that it's still business. Mm-hmm. And so it could be a case of that. Like I said, I don't know enough of the behind the scenes element of it and the other pieces of it. But to me, it's always you got to keep in mind, no matter what, no matter how friendly you are, no matter how, collegial you are with people, it's still business. There is still money involved. There's all of those considerations, and you have to keep those things in mind, because they're going to dictate decisions more than anything.
In any case, Cheick Kongo is a very fashionable person, and he has his European clothing boutique in West Hollywood. I hope that lasts longer than his UFC career. And mind you, he's been in the UFC since, 2006?
His UFC career has lasted pretty long.
Well, yeah, that's what I'm saying. I'm just hoping, because, with small businesses like that, they come and go. I'm just saying I hope it lasts that long and longer. I hope he finds success after the UFC, whether it be in fighting or not. I hope he does well, because like we've said on and off the air, Cheick Kongo's a nice dude. He's a good conversation. So we wish him the best. Choke MMA to Cheick Kongo. Hope you do well, my friend. And I hope that European fashion boutique stays up and running for business. Moving on, Eddie Alvarez decided to go to Twitter and say a bunch of things like, I'm going to go to fight in the underground MMA scene in Florida while they're trying to figure out this legal issue with Bellator. What is going on there, Spencer?
I really don't know. As someone who really enjoys Twitter, I think I've done a fairly good job with myself over the 10,000 plus tweets that I've had in my Twitter career, to limit the controversial, questionable, curious statements and keep them to a minimum. And there are times when somebody needs to be there grabbing your phone away from you. And this seemed like one of those times to me. Like it all stemmed from Bjorn Rebney, the CEO of Bellator MMA, revealing in a statement that settlement talks sort of soured between them and Eddie Alvarez, who's sort of in a contractual limbo right now of, is he coming, is he going, whatever. Eddie then went on Twitter and just sort of did like, sorry, I've been away trying to get this stuff figured out. I'm not going to settle. We're going to trial. Wow. I'm packing up my family. I sold my place. We're going to move down to Florida. I hear they got unsanctioned fights down there that I can make some cash. Just at some point, somebody's got to just hand over the iPhone. Go sit down, Ed. Sorry,
take a chill
account got hacked. Will fix.
Yeah,
peace out.
Pull a Jamie Yeager and say, I don't know who this Twitter person is, but I'm the real Jamie Yeager. If you guys don't remember that, a few years ago, about 3 or 4 years ago, Jamie Yeager came out with some blasphemous stuff. I don't even remember what he said on Twitter, but he immediately opened another Twitter account and said that was the real Twitter account. And everybody kind of said, yeah, buddy, sure. In reference to Alvarez, one of the tweets that he had was, Miami has unsanctioned fights somewhere for cash. Told my wife I might need to take the drive down there on the weekend to stay sharp. Is it really a good idea to drive down to Miami for some unsanctioned fights to work on your game? ESK, if you were a professional fighter...
Is it really good to be announcing that on Twitter when you're sort of waiting to figure out which of the really lucrative deals you're going to sign?
Yeah, I'm going to go with no on that.
I'm going to say you should probably not do that.
Yeah. Again.
You should probably be like, one, if you want to go to Miami and take unsanctioned fights, that is on you. You can make those decisions. You're a grown-ass man. But to announce that on Twitter is just to me, the height of stupidity. I mean, there's some more dumb stuff that happens on Twitter, but to be a professional fighter who's in limbo, who we know has 2 very nice contracts sitting on the table, to the point that I have had fighters in the lightweight classes and below refer to it as, I got to get me some of that Eddie Alvarez money. Just, you don't be telling people on Twitter, and you have a lot of followers and a lot of people like us in the media that are going to see these things and be like, Eddie Alvarez is talking some crazy. You don't say that stuff on Twitter. Just stop. Just, if you're going to do it on your own time. Don't tell everybody.
Rips.
And now we're possessed like the UFC 159 broadcast.
Yes. That was a random Jerry Rips for our GracieMag.com Choke MMA podcast audience. For those who don't know, between rounds 1 and 2 of the Alan Belcher and Michael Bisping fight, there was a random satanic voice that just played on the broadcast that said Jerry Rips. And it was really weird. I checked Twitter to see if it really happened, and it really did happen. So there you go. But continue your point on Alvarez, sir.
No, I mean, that was my point, is just, you don't need to be on there talking about how you're going to go to Miami and take these unsanctioned fights and whatever, because it just, like, it's pointless to me, because it does nothing other than give us talking points. Also, it's not a positive step for your career. Like, let's be honest. If it's an unsanctioned fight, it ain't safe.
Nope.
And so you go down there and get hurt in an unsanctioned fight. Maybe you get that cash that you were promised for that fight, but it could very well change up the situation going forward. Maybe then Bellator doesn't want to match, or quote unquote match, the UFC's offer. Maybe the UFC decides to take their offer off the table, and then you're just fighting in unsanctioned fights. So maybe you think things through a little bit more.
Probably not the best thing to do when you have a lawsuit pending that can determine the rest of your career. Yeah. So Eddie Alvarez kind of just stop.
Lucrative. It's not like we're haggling over nickels and dimes. Nope. This is, the UFC contract offer was a very good contract offer that went up in $5,000 increments with each successive fight. Mm-hmm. Bellator matched that component. You're looking at $80,000 a fight. Maybe you don't go take an unsanctioned fight in Miami for $2,000 or whatever.
Best advice I've heard all week, ESK. Thank you very much. Gegard Mousasi tweeted, I don't know, earlier this week or last week, that he wanted fans' opinions about him going down to 185. There have been a few reports on this. GracieMag.com actually reached out to Mousasi's manager, Nima Safapour, and asked them what the deal was. He didn't want to comment on Mousasi's injury, but he did say that Gegard is absolutely serious about dropping to 185, and that they would only do it, however, if they got a top 5 middleweight. So, with that in mind, with Gegard Mousasi seriously contemplating going down to 185, who do you think he should fight, ESK?
Yushin Okami, and I said this to you.
Yushin Okami, thank you. Yushin Okami, thank you.
I said this to you off air. Yushin Okami is my forever go-to for people coming to the UFC in the middleweight division, or thinking about moving up or down in the middleweight division, because he's that guy that is the perennial top, anywhere from 2 at the height of his career to no worse than about 6th or 7th, I would say, in the division, depending on where you rank guys out and where you put Michael Bisping based on his resume and stuff like that. And if you can't beat Yushin Okami, then you're not going to be fighting for championships in the middleweight division. And with a guy like Mousasi, who's coming off a win in his UFC debut, albeit over Ilir Latifi, he's been a middleweight in the past and had a lot of success. I think it's a much better fit for him. He doesn't necessarily have the size and strength that I would look for in the light heavyweight division, where guys are, you've got guys that walk around at 230, 240 and cut down to 205.
Right.
I think it makes sense. He is, as you said, dealing with recovery from knee surgery, so he's going to be out for a little bit. But there are options there for him, and he would be a really interesting addition, I think, because we've seen Anderson Silva beat the majority of the upper echelon, or it's guys like the aforementioned Michael Bisping who have sort of been around long enough and not made it to the championship level that you're like, well, you could probably force another fight where Bisping's in contention, and if he wins, he gets a title shot. Or you could bring in this still relatively young, very much a hyped and buzzed prospect a couple years ago who sort of stalled out a little bit because of injuries in Strikeforce, who could be a fresh face in the division and really continue to create some intrigue going forward.
I would say match him with Michael Bisping.
Yeah,
if Bisping would be open to it, I think that would be a good test for Mousasi coming into the UFC. I mean, much respect to Ilir Latifi for taking his fight on like 4 days' notice, but I'm sorry, brother. I'm not going to use you to gauge whether or not Gegard Mousasi's good, especially, with him having his knee problem. But if you get a healthy Gegard Mousasi, who at one time was considered one of the best middleweights or light heavyweights in the world, I think circa 2008, 2009, Michael Bisping would be the perfect one to match him with. And I think if Bisping were to get past Mousasi, I think that should grant him the title shot that he's been looking for. I mean, he's been that close so many times and has not been able to reach it. But I think a win over somebody with the resume of Mousasi would put him there. Do you think that's a reasonable thing to do?
Yeah, absolutely. It would be a fight that has upside for both guys. It has value for both people. I don't know whether Bisping would take it or not. He strikes me as somebody who may not necessarily want that fight now, coming off a victory over Alan Belcher.
Well, what else is he going to get?
Well, and that's sort of what it comes down to. If you have to have that sort of frank discussion with Michael of you're not getting back in there with Vitor. You're not getting the winner of the Vitor Belfort Luke Rockhold fight. Mm-hmm. You're not getting the next title shot, I would think, regardless of who wins between Anderson Silva and Chris Weidman. So these are probably the best options you have. Is maybe the winner of the Mark Munoz Tim Boesch fight coming up, both of whom Michael Bisping has had some things to say about in the past. Or a guy like
who doesn't
Mousasi
Michael Bisping have something to say about?
If you ask Michael Bisping, he will say he's just responding to stuff other people have said about him. Like Alan Belcher's been calling me out for years. Same with Tim Boesch, who has he beaten? But then Mark Munoz is the one in there that is absolutely false, because Mark Munoz doesn't have an ill word to say about anyone ever. Because he's the nicest human being on the face of the earth.
By the way, little plug here. We will have a feature on Mr. Munoz, who I call the nicest guy in the UFC. In the next edition of Gracie Mag. Look for it, subscribe to it. You could go to graciemag.com and pick up your subscription and get some cool stuff in addition to the subscription. So, moving on. Chris Weidman and Anderson Silva is official. Just before we wrap up here, tell me, ESK, who do you think is going to win that fight? And I ask you this because I've just seen and heard about Weidman being the guy to beat Anderson Silva for a number of reasons. So tell me, with your expert opinion, who do you think wins that fight?
I will not pick against Anderson Silva just because he's won, I think it's like something like 392 fights in a row now.
You picked a Brazilian! Play the celebration music.
And so that I don't continue to pick against Brazilians. But I will say this. If anyone is going to do it, Chris Weidman is a guy that does have the skill set, I believe.
What is
he
that?
Is a younger, stronger, faster version of Chael Sonnen with better ground and pound, with better submission game on the ground. That being said, coming to fight the greatest fighter in the history of our sport thus far, off a year layoff and surgery and various other natural disasters ruining your house and your neighborhood, is a very tough situation to walk into. So I will pick Anderson Silva now, a couple months from now when the fight actually happens, but I will not be one of the people that is shocked if we end up with a new middleweight champion.
Here's a question that I find very important. Are you going to actually be in Vegas for that fight with me? Are you going to come out and enjoy the snacks that they provide at the press conferences?
I'm not, because later in that month, they are coming to Seattle again for another Fox show, and Seattle is a 3-hour boat ride, $100 round trip for me. And so that just makes all kinds of more sense financially. Because see, you said earlier you're on a reporter's salary. Well, I'm on a freelance budget.
which is far different from a reporter's salary. Let us be clear. A freelance budget is next to pennies.
That's right. The reporter's salary means the check shows up either bi-weekly or monthly.
This is true.
And it goes into the account, direct deposit. You don't have to worry about it. Whereas the freelance budget is, I've got this whiteboard in my office full of pitches and full of ideas and stuff that I got to try to sell someplace so that I can make some money.
Well, hopefully you're able to make it to one of these Vegas shows at one point, so that we could take part in the Sin that is Sin City in Las Vegas. I think we should bring on Steven Marrocco in our next segment. What do you think?
I'm up for that. Steven is a good dude. Always good to have even more reputable experts than ourselves.
Really, that is true. Steven is from MMAJunkie.com and USA Today. He's a good friend of the show, and we will have him on next. UFC 159 was last weekend, and it was probably one of the weirdest cards that I've ever seen in covering this sport. ESK, I think you could say the same thing. Can you not?
I would definitely say the same thing. It was a night of crazy.
Just a bunch of broken toes and jerry rips and all that kind of calamity. I really don't know how to explain it. So, in order to understand it better, we brought on MMAJunkie.com and USA Today writer Steven Marrocco to kind of help us figure this whole thing out. He was on the scene down there in New Jersey. Steven, can you kind of fill us in with what all that stuff was? I mean, did you pick up the weirdness being cage side over at UFC 159?
It wasn't until I actually went out to the floor for the main card, because they had me doing something a little bit different this time around, something that I hadn't done before, which is basically to hang out in the media center during the preliminary card and catch guys as they came back, and then did they do little media scrums, little mini media scrums right after their fights. And so you get them when they're just coming off the fight. And for the preliminary card, that's actually useful, because there's a lot of times there's, interesting stuff that happens. So you get to ask them about what just happened, basically. And then you've got another eye on the screen. You're trying to sort of watch the fights as they take place, and you're also trying to interview at the same time. So it didn't really become clear to me until I walked out on the floor for the main card, and the first fight obviously was pretty competitive and a good start to the main card, but then we had Phil Davis versus Vinny, which was not really well received by the audience.
No, not by any stretch.
Yeah, I think I saw a man with a little bit of chest hair poking out of his tracksuit saying "More jiu-jitsu." And
we have New Jersey accents here on the Choke MMA podcast too, ladies and gentlemen. Steven Marrocco.
Yeah, no problem. So that was kind of a snoozer a little bit. I mean, I thought it was fine. I didn't have a problem with it, but it certainly wasn't K1 level striking, as they say. So then we proceeded to Roy Nelson versus Cheick Kongo. We all know what happened there. Cheick Kongo decided that it was good to move into the power hand of Roy.
Which is exactly what we predicted what would happen. ESK and I actually broke down the fight card going into last weekend, and we both said overhand right, Cheick Kongo knocked out. And sure enough, that's what happened, which adds to the weirdness of this because, we're never right about predictions, but magically we're right on with this one.
I don't think that's weirdness. I think it's stupidity. As much as I like Cheick, I really like Cheick. He's a big teddy bear. I really enjoy talking to him, But why would you do that? Why would you do that?
Because you're a Cheick Kongo.
And we weren't alone in predicting that. I will say that much. I think most everybody sort of did he's going to walk into that power shot. He doesn't do a good job of fending off great big power shots. And Roy's going to throw it.
See, here I am trying to praise us for our MMA expertise. And you go ahead and bunch us up with the rest of the MMA universe saying, we had the same exact opinion as everyone else. Well done, ESK.
Hey,
listen, guys, get out of your mom's basement and get into reality. Kongo is just, he just doesn't have the strategery needed to get to the upper level of the heavyweight division, and that's why he's being cut. I think Dave Doyle from Fighting had a really good point today, which is he's been given a lot of chances to break into the top of the division. And there are a lot of people who would say he's been used as a gatekeeper. There's only so many times you can be used in that capacity before you become sort of a too expensive of a line item, and they have to look at getting some cheaper and fresher talent.
How sad that these guys are realistically looked at as line items, like they're a spot on the invoice, they're a number on a piece of paper that they have to figure out. Should we keep this? I don't know. It's a little over budget. Let's cut them. So, yeah. But I think the biggest takeaway from UFC 159 for me anyway was Jerry Rips. What was Jerry Rips on the broadcast all about? And Spencer, you know what I'm talking about. The devil voice that came out in between round 1 and 2 of Michael Bisping and Alan Belcher. Steven, did you hear anything about that on the floor, on the scene at UFC 159 about the devil voice that came out in mid-round?
I was reading about it today, and honestly, I hadn't heard it. I'm obviously gonna get on YouTube or something and try to track it down because it sounded pretty entertaining.
Well, here I'll go ahead and play it. Well, not play it, but I'll do my best impersonation. It sounded exactly like this: Jerry Rips. Randomly, exactly that. Randomly, in between rounds 1 and 2 of Bisping versus Belcher, this devil voice just comes on and during the broadcast and says, "Jerry Rips," and everybody on Twitter just kind of said, "Is Satan in Michael Bisping's corner?"
Everyone sort of double checked that everyone else heard it as well.
Yeah. Like I'm not tripping out here. I'm not on Alpha Brain or anything right now, am I? Like that's what I was thinking.
Right. Wow. And people started checking for the Prince of Darkness in his general vicinity.
Well, what was funny is I watched that specific part of the broadcast a couple times, and there was a red light shining up on one of Bisping's cornermen, and it just made him look, immaculately red. I'll put it like that, immaculately red. And then all of a sudden, Jerry Rips comes across the broadcast, and
Fontenay, that's your smoking gun right there. That is your smoking gun.
The broken toe. Now there was some reports afterwards that said compound fracture. Then the chief of orthopedic surgery over here in Cedars-Sinai in Los Angeles came on UFC Tonight and said, no, it was a dislocation. And then there were some reports later that said, no, that's stupid. It's a compound fracture. So have you heard from Bones' manager, Malky Kawas, confirming anything about, whether it's a compound fracture or anything of the sort?
It's a dislocation. Jones tweeted it today.
So it's a dislocation now.
Yeah, it's a dislocation, which is good. I mean, it's. I think that's a considerably better timeline for recovery than obviously. I tweeted this when it happened. I had a friend who did jiu-jitsu at the Gracie School on Wilshire Boulevard in L.A., and his toe got caught between the mats and it severed the toe.
Ah!
So. At first, it looked like kind of one of those instances, especially with the blood coming out. It looks like a partial sever, but I guess it's just dislocated, and they're saying now it's going to be something like, what do they say, 6 to 8 weeks, Spencer?
Yeah, 6 to 8. I mean, I thought it was going to be as nasty as Anthony Parash's when I think he had the same thing as your friend where it got caught in the mat. Didn't sever it completely, but really, really open fracture that was pretty gnarly if you remember the picture. And I mean, he was out for, I think he missed like 2 months before he could do anything, and was back fighting within 6 to 8. So to shrink that timeline down for John, because it's just a dislocation, is a very positive thing.
Thank heavens John didn't wear his new wedding ring into the cage. Otherwise, we also might have had another one of those pictures that came up just a couple weeks beforehand.
Oh dear. Yes, we want to avoid that, but I'm still taken back by the fact that first it was a compound fracture, then it was a dislocation, then it went back to compound fracture. Now we're hearing from Jones again today that it's a dislocation. Do you guys? I mean, seeing that it's gone back and forth a couple of times, do you guys think that there might be a little bit of spin going on here from the Jones camp, trying to play it down and saying that he could come back a little sooner?
I don't think there's a lot of value to sort of downplaying it and trying to set a timeline for him to maybe come back sooner, because, I mean, I think you're better off saying he's going to be 6 months and then 3 months from now being like, he'll be ready to go next month if he needs to. Makes more sense to me than saying, no, he could be back in 4, and then all of a sudden it's like, well, no, it turns out he's not going to be back for another 4 more.
Oh.
I would rather err on the side of caution than err on the side of, no, he'll be back.
Steven, your take.
Well, I don't really care all that much. Whatever. The guy's gonna see his doctor. He says 6 to 8 weeks. Great. I mean, you gotta. I think it's a little bit optimistic. I'll say that 6 to 8 weeks is what I think is going to take for him to get back to a baseline level where he can even get in the gym, and then he's got to I'm basically saying I think we should add some time to this. If they're saying 6 to 8 weeks, I don't think it's necessarily an accurate representation. It's basically just where he's going to need to get back to square one, and then it's a matter of what's going on with the schedule. Does Alex Gustafsson fight Machida? Do they put it off and they do Gustafsson versus Jones maybe at the end of the summer or something like that? I think what the current prognosis is. It's probably just a little bit optimistic, but I don't see any design or spin. I think that fighters in general downplay their own injuries for the most part, unless, of course, they're doing it off the record and behind the scenes to get out of something.
Okay. Over under 5 seconds, the time it took you to upchuck something when you first saw a picture of Jones's toe being mangled the way it was. ESK, go.
I was okay. I was under. I was safe. No upchucking at all. Just that looks gross.
Yeah, it's pretty bad. Steven.
Under. Seen way worse on the internet.
Yeah.
Clearly, the stuff you look up on
the internet. You know what actually I got was harder for me is to look at the you guys hear
you don't say
about Jeff Hanneman, the guitarist for Slayer?
Yes.
He died of liver failure yesterday. You guys hear about that?
Yes.
Okay, so he contracted what they call necrotizing facet something from stuff. And it's basically flesh-eating. It's basically a flesh-eating disease. And I Googled that, and I'm really regretful that I Googled that.
Yeah.
Those pictures were way worse than a silly toe.
Yeah.
And as I was saying, clearly, Stephen, the stuff that you randomly Google on the internet is disturbing to me. I can only speak for myself. I won't speak for ESK, but you are just a weirdo, sir, and I appreciate you for that.
Yeah. Well, we've known this for years.
Yeah. And judging by the music, that means another Choke MMA podcast is in the books. For Steven Marrocco, E. Spencer Kite, I am Eric Fontenez saying see you next week. Peace.